Hey everybody, welcome to NFL Fantasy Live. I'm Patrick Claybon here with Marcus Grant and Adam Rank, Maurice Jones-Drew, hopefully, and Michael F. Florio are going to join us in a bit. Today, guys, it's quite the holiday. It's both National Sports Day and Global Cat Day on the same day. So, Marcus, what is the best? We'll combine both cat mascot in all of sports.
Ooh, the best cat. I mean, I don't know. I feel like Sir Purr has had his moment in the sun thanks to Robbie Anderson earlier this year. So I got to put Sir Purr right now. It might be recency bias, but he's in the lead for me.
You know what? I got to give a shout out to my alma mater, Corona High School, the home of the Panthers, and all the fun, kids during my high school who donned the Panthers head. So have to give a shout out to them.
Yeah, I'll shout out as well. My parents' alma mater, Tuskegee Golden Tigers. Tigers are good. Golden Tigers even better without Dr. Ernest and Dr. Patience Claybon. Before they were doctors, wouldn't have this guy. So a little biased, but let's do it anyway. Let's start the show as we do every Friday with our Sunday Showdowns, as we give you our opinions on starts, sits, sleepers, everything in every single Sunday matchup. We will go to the Battle of the Bays, Aaron Rodgers and his Green Bay, and Tom Brady and his Tampa Bay. Rank, start us off here.
Stop it. Oh, I missed this NFC Central contest from years ago. But, of course, Mike Evans is somebody you're obviously going to start. But I just have to point out that the Packers have been playing really good against the pass this season. They've allowed 150 yards per game. That's the 7th fewest in the NFL. They've not allowed a top 15 wide receiver since week 1. Chris Godwin expected to be back in this contest too. And we've only seen Mike Evans catching those short touchdowns. He seems awfully touchdown dependent. So just beware, but you're still starting him. But another player who I like in this contest is Robert Tonyan, the tight end. Now, obviously the last time we saw him, he had 3 touchdowns in prime time. And it might seem like you're chasing the points, but he's had 5 touchdowns since week 2. That is tied for the most in the NFL with Mike Evans, who I was just talking about. So this is me bringing the synergy together. I'm interested to see how this works out with Devontae Adams back, but I still, because of the lack of depth at the tight end position, still feel like he's a top 10 tight end this week.
Big Bob Tonyan, big game from him for Rank. Let's go over to the Texans and the Titans. Marcus, you're not sold on a guy who had a great week last week.
Yeah, I'm saying to beware of Ryan Tannehill, and he had a huge game on Tuesday against the Buffalo Bills. Look, he has taken advantage of some good matchups, though I'll give him certainly credit for that, but you just gotta watch him. He's mostly just being efficient. He's not turning the ball over. He's not necessarily going out and doing anything spectacular. This Houston defense is fairly middle of the pack in quarterback fantasy points allowed, but the run defense is bad. So I have a feeling this could be a game where the Titans just hand the ball to Derrick Henry repeatedly and sort of don't ask Ryan Tannehill to do a whole lot in this game. So I think his totals might just be sort of mediocre at best.
On the other side, I am taking a page out of Rank's post-coach firing book and saying start Brandon Cooks, as we're dividing this season into 2 parts, before Bob and after Bob. Tim Kelly calling plays for his long-term viability, and it's going to be against the Jags, where there was a lot of action for Brandon Cooks. He had 12 targets against the Jags. Let's say he gets half of that opportunity that he did last week. That's still 6 targets. I'm not risking post-Bob Cooks on the bench in deeper leagues. Let's go over to the Falcons and the Vikings. No Dalvin Cook, so everybody's already on board the Alexander Mattison train. Who else should we start, right?
And I'm sure everybody's going to be starting Adam Thielen as well, but I really like Justin Jefferson as a rebound game this week. He's had at least 14 fantasy points in 2 out of his last 3 games. Of course, the Seahawks game was not great, but the Falcons have allowed the 2nd most receiving yards per game to wide receivers. They're allowing 3 receiving touchdowns per game this season. That is the most in the NFL. So we saw last week how DJ Moore was able to kind of get back into our fantasy lives. I really do believe that Justin Jefferson will do the same thing here.
And we had lots of scoring in this game, or we expected, and we assume lots of touchdowns as well. And I know his health and production have fluctuated over the years, but Todd Gurley is still scoring touchdowns at an alarming rate. In fact, ever since he had a disappointing week 1, his fantasy scoring output has gone up every single week. And here's a Vikings defense that gives up around 25 points a game against running backs. Let's keep riding Gurley. And speaking of talented, gifted, just fantastic running backs and fantastic people. The internet has allowed us to obtain Maurice Jones-Drew. We are glad to have you back, MJD.
I don't know what happened. We were talking the trade before the show, and then all of a sudden everything crashed. So it just seems like the universe doesn't want me to get a certain player.
Just had to snatch the plug. Let's get a couple teams that have met the Atlanta Falcons already. MJD, give us a must start in this one.
Well, as you see it here, David Montgomery, the Carolina Panthers are allowing the most scrimmage touchdowns to running backs. And if you're Matt Nagy, you're going to say, hey, I'm going to get the ball to David Montgomery. They have an issue covering backs out of the backfield. He's had 6+ targets in 2 straight games. So they're getting him involved in the passing game. And I think this is a great matchup. So if you have David Montgomery, he's a must start for me.
I would say you might want to lean towards sitting Teddy Bridgewater this week. And he played really well last week, like the last couple of weeks when he had really good matchups. But let's be honest, we came into the season expecting him to sort of be a streaming option, which means you were always going to kind of look at the opponent when you decided whether or not to start or sit Teddy Bridgewater. And the Bears, not the opponent you want to mess around with. They've given up the second fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So this is a week where you probably want a different option if you're looking to stream at the position.
Yeah, not just Teddy Bridgewater. We'd be thinking that about a few quarterbacks in the NFL up against that Bears defense. We're going to run through the rest of Sunday's games throughout the hour, including the tight race for the top spot in the AFC North. But first, let's catch everyone up on some news in case you missed it. Broncos running back Melvin Gordon not practicing today due to an illness. Mike Garafolo and Tom Pelissero both reporting that the illness is not COVID-related, and it's also not related to the DUI charge he received over the weekend. Head coach Vic Fangio says that Gordon is being treated, but his status for Sunday is questionable, looking more likely that Phillip Lindsay will take over as the starter. And once again, for everyone who didn't see the headline coming this week, the Chiefs have signed running back Le'Veon Bell. He is not eligible to play for KC this week because of COVID protocols, so his first game would be 9 days from now in Denver, followed by a revenge matchup against the Jets. You called it on the landing spot, MJD. Now what?
Well, this is the thing, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they never really wanted him to be this bell cow back. They wanted to have a guy to spell him, and obviously with Williams opting out, you get Le'Veon Bell in there. And I think you're going to see, once they get him there, you're going to see him out there in some reserve situations. Now, it's going to hurt Darrell Williams a little bit, but it happens. Le'Veon Bell's a very talented player. The Chiefs love him. They want him to be a part of their team. And I think you're going to get I don't know how much value he'll bring, maybe RB2 or a great flex play, but he's going to get opportunities to touch the ball when he gets out there.
And Marcus, Clyde Edwards-Helaire had us singing all season, but now does this kind of change the tone on his fantasy value with Bell on the roster?
It definitely does, because as Maurice mentioned, he's not going to go out there and be the bell cow back. He's not going to be a guy who gets 20 touches per game. That number's probably going to get cut in half once Le'Veon Bell is on the field. And this is probably more in line with what we thought would happen at the start of the year when Damian Williams is going to be healthy. Now, obviously, he's a go for this week, but I would say stay patient. Just see how this split's going to work out before you make any panic moves. Although I would say if you're in a dynasty league, maybe you explore seeing if you can get him at a bit of a lower trade value, just because you have a lot of managers who are probably panicking right now about seeing Lev Bell show up.
Panic is something we always advise against. Let's look over to a loaded Monday night. A reminder as things are going on there. No show for us on Monday. The doubleheader first on Fox. The Chiefs and the Bills meet up in Buffalo, and then later that night, there's the Cardinals visiting Andy Dalton and the Dallas Cowboys on Monday Night Football on ESPN. Rank, we'll start with you. What jumps out to you about this Monday night slate?
Well, you know what? I get a lot of questions now about Josh Allen, who obviously had a disappointing game on Tuesday. And to me, that was really just a product of the circumstance. It's an unusual year. Playing on Tuesday night is an unusual situation. I don't want to put too much stock in it, because I really do believe that what we saw from Josh Allen in the first month of the season is the player that we're going to be able to rely on, the guy who is scoring over 25 fantasy points per game. And he's got a pretty good matchup against the defending Super Bowl champions, who have been pretty generous against opposing quarterbacks this season. So calm down. It's a bad game. You flush it and you move on.
Yeah, after the flush, Rank, I'll stay in the same backfield. Devin Singletary dodged that Le'Veon Bell acquisition. Fantasy managers were probably a little bit worried about, but here comes Zach Moss to potentially take that goal line usage away from him. like he did earlier in the season. Singletary had scored a couple of red zone touchdowns in Moss's absence. We're gonna find out at least what this offense will look like with him and Moss both on the team coming up here on Monday night.
Well, I'm going to go to that Dallas Cardinals game, Dallas-Arizona game later on in the evening, and you mentioned Andy Dalton. And this will be our first chance to get a look at him as the starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. Now, you can't expect one-to-one production with what Dak Prescott was giving you before the injury, but I still think it's going to be decent. The Cowboys say they still want to be aggressive throwing the football. They still have a lot of talented pass catchers there. So if you lost Dak or if you have quarterback issues and you were able to get Andy Dalton, I think there's going to be a situation where he's going to be startable most weeks, and we're going to really get a good idea of how they use him coming up on Monday.
For me, it's going to be all about Kyler Murray and Patrick Mahomes. I believe that they'll be the QB1 and QB2 this week. I think the matchup bode well for both guys. You're talking about Kyler Murray going against the Dallas Cowboys defense, and then Patrick Mahomes coming off a game where he really didn't play his best. And so you get an opportunity to bounce back, and we saw what Ryan Tannehill was able to do against this Buffalo Bills defense. It all comes down to is Tre'Davious White going to play or not? And if he doesn't, expect a big game from Patrick Mahomes. And then obviously for Kyler Murray, it's going to be a huge day in Dallas.
Get into Breaking the Ranks with Adam Rank and NFL.com fantasy player rankings cultivator Michael F. Florio, the segment where Florio tends to his garden of rankings all week. And then Rank comes in to take a weed whacker to the whole thing while Mike tries to defend his hard work. Rank, let's get it.
That's what I do. I come in with a 9-iron. And last week, Florio, how did Jared Goff do?
He did pretty good. I think he did a lot better than Joe Burrow.
Oh, that's true. Okay, that's not fair. Listen,
Yikes.
There's one though, and I gotta. Okay, that's fair. It's fair. Listen, Kirk Cousins. I don't enjoy this opportunity to come on national airwaves to have to defend Kirk Cousins because I certainly don't want to do it. But Michael, he's going up against the Atlanta Falcons, who've allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. They've allowed a 300-yard passer in all 5 games this season. Of course, that's with Trubisky and Foles combined. How is Kirk Cousins not a top 10 quarterback this week? I think he's better than Ryan. I think he's better than Dalton. Like, come on.
I like him a lot. I just think this is a good week for quarterbacks. Like, Ryan has a pretty good matchup. Gardner Minshew has a good matchup. Andy Dalton has those loaded weapons around him. It was hard for me to get Kirk Cousins too high because he flopped last week in a good matchup, and his season high is just 21 fantasy points. He's scored less than 15 in 3 of his last 4 games, again, including last week in a good matchup. So while I like Cousins and I think he's a good streaming option, there's just some other options I like a little bit more.
It says a lot that Rank is such a Kirk Cousins supporter in this instance, as we all know, a passionate Bears fan. Let's look over Rank at running backs.
You know what? Myles Gaskin is one that kind of jumped out at me because last week going up against the San Francisco 49ers, he ran the ball 16 times, 57 yards, finally got into the end zone. But the thing that's most impressive to me is that he's now being involved in the passing game where he had 5 receptions, And so I think that's significant. And this week he's got the Jets, who've allowed a top 7 fantasy running backs in back-to-back games. 19 makes him an RB2. But for some reason, I don't know. I find it a little disrespectful. Do you not like the number 37? Do you not like, what is it? What is it about him that you can't put him higher?
So I do really like the matchup, but my thinking was last week was his first game scoring over 15 fantasy points. It was awesome to see him get that goal line touchdown, but I still have a little bit of fear that Jordan Howard or maybe even Fitzpatrick could vulture those. But Rank, I do think this is one that you convinced me on. I think I got to raise Gaskins a little bit in the rankings. I think I was a little too low on him the first go around.
Love it.
All right. Okay, Michael. So don't let Rank. Okay. 6 receivers probably per team, 32 teams, almost 200 receivers. So you've got them ranked. Rank, what is your hypercritical criticism of his receiver rankings this week?
This isn't hypercritical, but the disrespect being shown for Michael Gallup. Now, I think, Michael, you and I are both in concert of how much we love CeeDee Lamb this week. The Cardinals are bad against slot receivers. And I know that I think you're more statistical base. I'm more emotional base. And I look at what happened at the end of last week's game against the Giants. And when Andy Dalton needed to make key throws, he was looking for Michael Gallup. And that is just something I cannot get out of my mind. And I just feel like he is a wide receiver 2. I know that what you have him as is a low end. He's right in wide receiver 3. I just feel like certain quarterbacks favors, and I know it's a small sample size, but I really love Michael Gallup this week.
I did like seeing Andy Dalton throw to him. Those 2 deep catches from Dalton last week really did save his week. And something weird is happening with the Cowboys wide receivers as Cooper's snaps are going down like each week and Gallup's seem to be going up. But Gallup has still finished outside the top 35 wide receivers in 4 to 5 games this year. To me, he is still a boom or bust wide receiver option, so that is why I have him down at a wide receiver 3, especially, like you said, Rank, Cardinals allow points to slot receivers, but against outside wide receivers, they've been pretty tough this year.
So there it is, folks. You can see it at home, the emotional approach versus the statistical approach. We'll see how it plays out. We know you're going to be, as a stranger on the internet, kinder to Florio's rankings. So check them out at NFL.com/fantasy.
Are they?
Get your lineup right for week 6. Maybe. In the meantime, let's get some more Sunday showdowns. Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Florio, you're starting a recent waiver pickup.
Yeah, I'm saying if you were lucky enough to get Chase Claypool off of waiver wires, you should go ahead and start him. He showed his ceiling last week. It was more fantasy points than any wide receiver scored this season. But what I like is that he led the team in targets, catches, yards, and touchdowns. He had 11 targets last week. Juju hasn't seen that number in a single game this season. Deontay Johnson has been ruled out, and the Browns are allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. I think this is another week where Claypool can have a big game.
Steelers defense is tough, so I think it's going to be very tough for Baker Mayfield. And when things get tough for Baker, he looks for Jarvis Landry. I sense a lot of Kareem Hunt and Jarvis Landry in this one, especially if Odell is out of the game. As good as the Steelers are, we saw the Texans move the ball against them. I think 9 targets. Yes, that was at 9 targets for Jarvis Landry against a good Colts defense. I could see that again this week. Let's go over to the Bengals and the Colts. All clear after some false positives in Indy, Rank.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been waiting for the Jonathan Taylor breakout game, and I do believe that this is going to be the one. After a tough loss last week against the Browns, I think that the Colts are going to go back to running the football, and I think they're going to give an extended opportunity to Taylor in this one to go ahead and take advantage of this matchup. So if you've been waiting, this is the JT breakout game.
Frank, I have been waiting, so I hope you're right. But speaking with another rookie this week, I'm going to say sit Joe Burrow against the Colts. Last week I said it was a big test for him going against the Ravens. He scored less than 5 fantasy points. I think he failed that test. It's another tough matchup this week. The Colts are allowing the fewest points per game to quarterbacks, and they are the only team holding quarterbacks to less than 200 yards per game. I think you get away from Joe Burrow this week.
All right, Ravens and Eagles, the battle of the birds. Florio, who we got?
I'm saying start Marquise Brown. He has 15 targets of 20-plus air yards this year. That is the 2nd most in the NFL. His targets have increased in 2 straight games. Like you see there, 12-plus fantasy points in 2 straight. And the Eagles are allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. I know the Ravens offense hasn't been what we thought, but this is an opportunity for their passing game to get right.
No, I'm with you, Michael. I love Hollywood Brown this week, but unfortunately, I'm going to be sitting Carson Wentz, who leads the NFL with 9 interceptions this season. The Ravens have allowed the 10th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, but those numbers are skewed because there is a game in there with Patrick Mahomes. In non-Patrick Mahomes games, they're allowing, on average, less than 12 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. I'm going to have to sit Carson Wentz this week.
Yeah, Wentz has struggled this season, but so has Lamar Jackson to an extent. He's QB 11 right now. He played through the knee last week, but before you panic, here's Marcus Grant, Maurice Jones-Drew with a little Feel Good Friday.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, as he said, look, Lamar Jackson hasn't been bad, but he was either the 1st or 2nd quarterback off the board in a lot of fantasy leagues. And right now, fewer than 950 passing yards, just 9 passing touchdowns, only 1 rushing touchdown. So I'm sure he's not giving folks the return on the investment that they had hoped for this season. So MJD, please try to make us feel a little bit better about Lamar Jackson's season.
Well, you know, there we go. Let's get the music started so I can get everyone in a good mood. And let's roll this tape. And I'll show you what he'll be doing going forward. Here we have Lamar Jackson play action pass. Now, it only works if you can run the ball, but watch the safety key on the first tight end. And Lamar Jackson does a phenomenal job of throwing the ball up the seam. Obviously, this is Mark Andrews, his best tight end, his favorite receiver. Nice throw to his body, catch the ball. We've seen this. Those are the 9 touchdown passes. What we need to see more of is this. Look, the linebacker misses him. Lamar's about to take off. Now, let's go. We have a block on a block. We got 2 guys out here blocking. This is what the Ravens do well. This is me. J.K. Dobbins is me because I'm like, touchdown. Because I have you, Lamar. Now we're going to take off. And Lamar knows that he has to do this more because guess what? That's how we win a championship. Lamar, you have to get back to running the football more in order for this offense to get back to what they're doing. It seems like right now you're not trying to run as much or they're coaching you to throw the ball a little bit. When everything goes away and there's no one open, just take off. We want more of that, please.
Ravens offense has not looked the same this year. Maybe they get back to their roots and why they were so successful last year. But I do feel better. I feel better. But Patrick, please, do you feel better?
Back here on NFL Fantasy Live, it is time for points, counterpoints. Since that Chiefs-Bills game got moved from Thursday to Monday, we got good news and bad news. The good news, our bitter rival Steve from accounting has 0 points right now going into the weekend. The bad news is it looks like he's got Mahomes, Zeke Elliott, and Nuke Hopkins in his lineup. I have no idea how he continues to do this, but we can start the week by putting up a big number and, make us able to counteract all that talent that he has. So, Maurice, you first. Give us a quarterback so we can beat Steve.
Well, first, Patrick, you need to trade me Derrick Henry so that I could beat Steve from accounting in our expert leagues. But that's neither here nor there. I'm going to go with the whole theory of when your coach gets fired, you have to ball out. And to me, Matt Ryan, it seems like this is the perfect opportunity for him to do it, okay? Matt Ryan's going to score 30-plus fantasy points. Julio Jones is healthy. Calvin Ridley's healthy. Todd Gurley's running well. And you're going against a Viking secondary that we've seen taken advantage of. And so, for me, this just seems like a match made in heaven. It may be a little emotional, but I think the numbers say play Matt Ryan 30-plus fantasy points.
All right, Mike, we need a running back that's going to counteract Steve and just his awfulness. Who would you like?
Do not trade Derrick Henry to MJD. Yes. Whatever you do, don't do it because he's going to have a monster game this week. Now, obviously, there was a little bit of concern on Tuesday because he played 53% of the snaps. But to me, that was just a product of the situation. Again, don't want to read too much into it until we see that become a full-on trend. I like the matchup this week against the Texans. They've allowed the second most rushing yards per game to running backs this season. They've allowed a top 7 fantasy running back in 2 of the last 3 games. And for one of the reasons Marcus was talking about earlier, while he's a little apprehensive about playing Ryan Tannehill, I think it's going to be a heavy dose of Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I'm going to keep him on my team to try to beat Steve. MJD, sorry about that. If we want to assemble that team, we got to have talent at the wide receiver position. Receiving is key. Like that one time Steve received my lunch order by accident, didn't say a word about it, ate my lunch. Just like A.J. Brown took Josh Norman's lunch all Tuesday. And in comes a secondary in Houston that might leave hungry as well. Brown didn't practice Thursday, which is understandable. He came back from injury and playing on Tuesday. He looks like a potential WR1 overall in the future, maybe even now, as long as Ryan Tannehill is playing so well. So I'm going to go with A.J. Brown. Marcus, if we need a tight end that's going to put up big points, who would you take?
Well, you mentioned that Steve's got Patrick Mahomes, so the way to counteract that is by starting Travis Kelce. I mean, look, I know that people are starting Travis Kelce anyway, but look, this is a real smash opportunity for him. The Bills have allowed the most receiving yards to tight ends this year, and they've allowed a top 5 fantasy tight end in 3 of the past 4 weeks. Plus, on top of it, Steve made fun of me for taking a tight end early. He's like, you can just stream the position. Why are you spending a second-round pick on Travis Kelce? So I would love if Kelce went out and made him eat those words this week.
Make him eat those words and less eating other people's lunches. Best of luck to everybody facing their own personal Steve from accounting. Let's dig in a little deeper into some numbers with Michael F. Florio's Fantasy Factoid. Florio, give us a stat that's going to help us win here in Week 6.
A good fantasy fact to know is that Ryan Tannehill has been throwing to tight ends on 31% of his throws. That is the second highest mark in the NFL, and it's led to great things for Jonnu Smith. He has scored 10 or more fantasy points in every game this year. He has finished as a top 10 tight end in every game that he has played. He is currently the tight end 3 in points per game. He has the 4th highest target share amongst tight ends. All of these are just reasons of me saying that value Jonnu Smith as a top 5 tight end going forward. There's plenty of opportunity going his way.
Yeah, he always jumps off the screen with just how explosive he is. Good that he's seeing so much action in this 2020 season. Let's get back into some Sunday showdowns, and we'll go over to the Broncos and the Patriots. Marcus, what are we doing?
We're starting Cam Newton is what we're doing. I mean, he's been activated off the COVID list and looks like he should be ready to go for this week's game. Facing a Broncos defense that's given up the 7th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Part of the reason, they're just not getting pressure. And this is probably where they miss Von Miller quite a bit. 2nd lowest QB pressure rate in the league. We saw against the Seahawks. The Seahawks couldn't get any pressure on Cam, and he lit them up. So I think he's a definite start this week.
All right, got the Rams and the Niners on Sunday night. Maurice Jones-Drew, which Ram is a must start?
Well, that's going to be Jared Goff, and I'll tell you why. One, he's from the Bay Area, so he always plays well back at home, but the Niners' defense is just banged up. Okay, you have both corners are out, no pass rush right now, and I think Sean McVay and this offense is playing lights out. Jared Goff is a must start. If you don't have him and he's on the waiver wire, pick him up. He's a great stream this week. It just seems like this defense is giving up a ton, and the Rams are rolling.
All right, and again, happy Global Cat Day on Earth to all the cats out there, and to the Lions and Jags also. Rank, give us somebody whose roar is more of a meow this weekend.
Well, I'm paying attention to what MJD is talking about because I have a team that has both Jared Goff and Gardner Minshew, and I'm worried about starting Gardner this week, especially with the injury concerns to DJ Chark. Now, remember the one bad game that Gardner had? It came when Chark was not on the field. So if he's unable to go on Sunday, I'm going to make that switch and make sure I start Jared Goff, although MJD's kind of convinced me of that anyways. But still, just for everybody else, just be concerned about Gardner.
Surprising sleepers presented by Geico every week. Michael F. Florio publishes his list of fantasy sleepers, which you can read at NFL.com/fantasyflorio. Give us some under-the-radar guys for this week.
My first surprising sleeper is Zach Moss. I think it's pretty evident that the Bills want to use 2 running backs, especially near the goal line. I don't think they particularly trust Devin Singletary. And Kansas City's weakness this year has been against the run. They've allowed a top 25 running back in 4 or 5 games and the 3rd most fantasy points per game to RBs in the last 2 weeks. So if you're diving a little bit deeper at running back, Zach Moss is a guy for you. And another tight end, another sleeper I like this week is Irv Smith. He ran last week 31 routes, 69% of the snaps. Those were both season highs for him. He had 5 targets, 4 catches, and 64 yards last week. And he is trending up at the right time as they get the Falcons, who have been get-right games for everyone. But particularly for tight ends, they are allowing the 2nd most fantasy points and the most touchdowns per game to the position.
All right, Marcus, let's get a sleeper from you.
I'm going to go with Christian Kirk, and it's been a slow start to the season for him, had some injury issues, but the last couple of weeks he's starting to pick some things up. He's been tied for 2nd on the team in targets, has a 29% share of the air yards, so they are throwing him the ball downfield, and he's got a fantastic matchup this week against the Dallas Cowboys, tied for the most receiving touchdowns allowed to the wide receiver position. So if you've been sort of hesitant, this could be a week to get Christian Kirk back in your lineup.
As you mentioned, taking on that Cowboys defense, so maybe some other Arizona Cardinals would make their way into your lineup as well, because it's hard to find a match sometimes. Those are the surprising sleepers presented by Geico. But at this point in the season, let's get some more matches. What about some fantasy blind date? And folks, here are your 2 contestants. It's Maurice Jones-Drew and Adam Rank, guys. We are here to find you a match. And hopefully, by removing the names of the players, we'll give you a fair shot at finding just what your heart desires for your Week 6 lineup. Contestant number 1, Mr. Jones-Drew, are you ready for your fantasy blind date?
Yes, I'm ready. I just want to say this. I am a Nobu kind of guy. I'm not one of these fast food joints. You got to wine and dine me. Let's go.
All right, it's true love with MJD. Player number 1 here enters the week with very similar numbers to player number 2, but he has done it in 2 fewer games this season, and he has a slightly better matchup this week. Who would you choose?
I like player number 1.
MJD goes with player number 1. That player is Jamison Crowder of the Jets. How do you feel about your blind date?
Well, unlike you, Patrick, he's the only option left for the Jets. So I love this pickup. I mean, I know he's going to get a ton of the targets. I know that Sam Darnold only relies on him. And again, he's working in the slot. So you're expecting him to get double-digit targets, maybe double-digit catches week after week after week. I love this matchup. The other guy, he has too much going on his offense. So give me the guy. I just want the guy.
All right, I will ignore your comments about the host, and we'll go to contestant number 2. Adam Rank, here is your fantasy blind date. Player number 1 leads in terms of rush attempts, yards, and has the better matchup. But player number 2 is more efficient and scores more touchdowns. Who are you starting on your blind date?
This is some sort of setup because player 2 seems too much. He seems better. But this is going to be something where it's going to be the wrong guy, and I'm going to be upset, but I'm going to take player 2.
He goes with player number 2, and surprise, those are actually Kyler Murray's rushing numbers. How do you feel about your selection?
I knew I was being set up, and I don't appreciate it, but it is one of the things why Kenyon Drake has not had a great season this year is that Kyler Murray, much like Cam Newton and Josh Allen, he's the de facto goal line back. Anytime they need a rushing score near the end zone, that wasn't necessarily near the end zone, but Kyler's calling his own number because he is the best guy to punch the ball into the end zone. So yes, it is disappointing. It is the reason why we should have known better with Kenyon Drake. I will apologize for that now, but it is what it is. Hey, listen, so I get Kyler Murray now? Cool, I'm stoked. Let's go.
I want to see how you would stack your daily fantasy lineups for the Sunday afternoon contest. Marcus, get us going.
All right, well, I went through and I definitely tried to find some places where I could maybe have a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of, some lower salaries. I definitely went with a Kirk Cousins opportunity there as well. But I want to take a look at Will Fuller because I think this is a really big opportunity for Will Fuller, who's had 15 or more fantasy points in every single game he's played this season. He's had 7 or more targets in 3 of 4 games, and he's facing a Tennessee defense that's given up the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. Another place that I felt like I could get some good value was with the Washington football team's defense, the WFT, DST, if you will. Look, sacks and turnovers, that's the way to score fantasy points defensively. The Giants have allowed 16 sacks in just 5 games. That's 7th most in the league. And they've lost 9 turnovers, 8 of them from Daniel Jones alone, who has 3 lost fumbles and 5 interceptions. So this is a chance for Washington to go out and maybe make some hay against a Giants offense that's struggling.
Yeah, I like the FT defense because last week we had Dallas and they played pretty well, but unfortunately I couldn't squeeze them in. I'm going with the Vikings. I noticed we both have Tim Patrick. I think that was a pretty nice little option there. I've got a Titans stack, but I want to talk about Mike Davis for a second. And I know everybody looks at the Bears defense and it's one of the best in the NFL, if not the best. But the way that you can attack the Bears is up the middle. Eddie Goldman, of course, opted out before the season started, and teams have had some success with them in between the 20s. They've had trouble punching the ball into the end zone, and that's why the Bears have not allowed a top 15 running back this season. But I expect that trend at some point to change. So I'm going to go with Mike Davis, and I also wanted to take a real easy one. I know you had Kirk Cousins in your lineup. I wanted to go with Tannehill, but I still wanted a part of that game, so I'm going to go with Adam Thielen for the obvious reasons. The Falcons are probably the most generous team against opposing quarterbacks and receivers this season.
I love that pick, Adam. I have Thielen in my lineup as well. He currently leads the league in target and air yard shares. But another player I made sure to get in my lineup was David Montgomery. Since Tariq Cohen has gone down, Montgomery is averaging 7 targets per game. It's just raising his floor so much. And the Panthers have allowed the most fantasy points and touchdowns to running backs after allowing them both the most in last season. So I think this is a week where the Bears are going to look to ride Montgomery and not X-Foles to do much. Another player I was looking to build around was James Robinson. I know he's been trending down the last 2 weeks, but this is a get-right type of matchup for him. The Lions have allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to running backs, including a league-high 148 rushing yards per game. I really like both of these running backs this week.
All right, let's finish strong on our Sunday showdowns, the Jets and the Dolphins. Marcus.
I'm starting Myles Gaskin this week. I mean, he's been playing well all year long. He's got a 65% snap share, about 17 touches per game, 4 or more targets in every game. So he's pretty much a part of everything they do offensively. And he's got a great matchup against the Jets, who've given up the 5th most fantasy points per game for running backs, tied for 2nd most rushing TDs allowed to running backs as well. So this is a great opportunity for Gaskin.
Marcus, I'm saying you could start his quarterback as well. Start Ryan Fitzpatrick against the Jets. Fitzy right now is the QB7 on the year in total points. He has scored 21 or more points in 4 straight games, including multiple passing touchdowns in 3 of those 4. The Jets have been burned by the better quarterbacks that they've faced this year, and Josh Allen and Kyler Murray. I think Fitz is their biggest test since those two. And this is somewhat of a revenge game for him, so start Fitzy this week.
The man of many revenge games, the football team and New York's other team. Who gets the start here, Marcus?
I'm going with Antonio Gibson. And I know we want instant gratification, so after about 2 or 3 weeks, we were sort of wondering, well, maybe this Gibson guy is not going to be what we thought. But he's starting to see more targets, 5 targets in back-to-back games. That actually could get better with Kyle Allen or even Alex Smith at quarterback. Plus, the Giants a bottom 12 defense against fantasy running backs this year.
Yeah, I love starting Antonio Gibson this week, and I'm also going to start Terry McLaurin. I know that people have some reservations because Kyle Allen is his quarterback, but we talked about it last week that DJ Moore really thrived with Kyle Allen. And another reason people might be scared is James Bradbury has been shutting down some opposing wide receivers. But with the volume of targets that Terry McLaurin is getting, I feel very confident starting him this week.
All right, everybody, welcome back to NFL Fantasy Live. We are here in garbage time. It's the last few minutes of our show for the week. Guys, better late than never for our advice for the people at home. What you got for them, JD?
Well, I mean, when your league is stale and no one's trying to trade and do certain things, don't try to trade T.Y. Hilton to people because guys like Adam Rank are going to air you out to the internet and tell everybody about your strategy. And it wasn't the fact that I was trying to give T.Y. Hilton away, even though he is the #1 receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, and they have to get right eventually, right? It's the fact that, hey, I'm just trying to get the communication started, Rank. I just don't get it. Why don't anyone want T.Y. Hilton? Why are we showing his bad tape? He has some good plays out there. We just got to get him and Philip here. Oh, no, that's not good. Why are we showing the bad stuff? If this doesn't help my... All right, I'm done. That was a setup.
This should be done. You should be done. Like I know you're trying to start a conversation, but if you're opening a conversation by telling me that Portillo's is garbage, I'm not going to listen to you. I become mad. So when you're trying to trade me T.Y. Hilton, I don't want to hear that noise. So now I'm
trying to break the ice.
It's not an icebreaker. It's very offensive to me. It is offensive to me. I take that seriously. And so this is the thing. So like now I see, but I kind of agree with your point because I'm like earlier this week I'm like we should start looking into getting rid of Christian McCaffrey. If only because he's not activated this week against the Chicago Bears. There's a chance he doesn't play the following week against the Saints, and then after that, there's a Thursday night game against the Falcons. There's a real possibility he misses 3 more games, and even when he does return. Mike Davis has played so well that he's going to have to get some carries himself. Christian McCaffrey still is a brand name that if you can go out there and start getting a lot of high return for it, you should do it. But not Michael F. Florio, who's taken the MJD route of like, here's 2 Garbo players for McCaffrey, which I just had to deny. Sorry.
See, now Christian McCaffrey is still a brand name guy. Sometimes you get a guy that you think is going to be the next big thing, and maybe he doesn't. Don't get stuck on a guy that's not performing just because you spent an early round draft pick on him. I know that you somehow feel like you're beholden and you're waiting for this guy to come around because you don't want to look like a fool because you spent a first round draft pick, say on Kenyon Drake. But at some point you got to realize that maybe it's just not going to happen and try to cut bait. Either put him on the bench or try to trade him. But don't feel like you're just going to keep throwing opportunities back in there and hopefully it's going to get better.
All right, and my advice is to all of us who are 0-5 right now. People are going to call you a loser. MJD is going to try to get you to trade your first 2 picks for T.Y. Hilton. But I do want to say this. Without losing, winning wouldn't feel good. Without struggle, success wouldn't mean as much. Losing is something that happens to you. It's not who you are. Also, if you're at the bottom, trade that waiver priority and use that to figure something out. That's our time for this week. We're off on Monday due to the doubleheader. We'll be back on Tuesday to wrap it all up. NFL Fantasy Live returns at 6 Eastern on Tuesday.